Book Club. This is the start of Summerfest. I am absolutely sweltering. This is not the most pleasant heat in Manchester for once. I have the police panel today, so we're going to be talking police procedurals and discussing your books. And first, let's meet our authors. So, George, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon. It's George Smith. In my books, it's George A. Smith because there are quite a few Smiths around, so I put the A in. I came late to writing novels. The trigger was the 2021 COVID pandemic restrictions. I really needed a household project, and that's how it started. So me, I'm a retired detective chief inspector and formerly head of Brighton CID. In addition to being an operational detective in each rank, during which time I actually was senior investigation officer to 18 murder investigations. I also worked with Counter-Terrorism Directorate, chasing terrorists in Ireland. I was then approached and became the first serving police officer to have my rank suspended by the Home Secretary. And for several years, I was a full-time member of MI5 counter-espionage. So I was once described at a meeting as a person who spent his career chasing murderers, chasing terrorists, and chasing spies. I corrected that and said, no, I actually caught them. That was me. Throughout my career, I prepared detailed reports from fraud to murder, etc. But it was never my desire to write a novel. Then lockdown came, couldn't get out. I needed a project. I looked at a lot of notes I had. Could I possibly write a novel, a fiction novel, on my life without breaching the Official Secrets Act? After a lot of research, decided, yes, I could. So that's how that originally started. I thought I could also use various hobbies I have. I own a woodland with 18,000 trees, believe it or not,
Wow.
and drive a Land Rover. So could I introduce that? So that is how it came about. My first book was A Secret Existence. The photograph is actually of my woodland with my Land Rover. So what is it about? Very briefly, it's about a young DCI recently returned from Ireland, where he'd been involved in IRA investigations. He lived in a cottage backing onto his woodland just outside of Petworth, which is within the South Downs National Park. And believe it or not, he drove an old Land Rover. He was recruited to MI5, dubious means, which is the security service. So the book's storyline is he's recruited, it goes through his training, it goes through his operations, and he was given a new identity, as all MI5 officers are. I have to say, for a few years, I enjoyed that bit because with a name like Smith, for several years, I had a totally different identity and no one ever said, I don't believe you. So it was strange, a strange existence because my colleagues in the police didn't know where I was. They thought I had some boring job at the Home Office. My family didn't know. And one of the things I found particularly strange was I worked with a very professional team, yet I didn't know their proper names. I didn't know anything about their background, yet I relied on them in all sorts of situations, sometimes dangerous. That was quite strange. I had some moral concerns sometimes about what we were doing, how we were doing it.
I think that's something that you've all got in common probably in your jobs. We'll come back to this again in a moment, George. So let's introduce Neil and Effie as well. So Neil, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm Neil Lancaster. I think many people on the UK Crime Book Club will know me. I've done a few of these before. I am the author of a couple of series of books, the Tom Novak books that I haven't really written for a little while. Unfortunately, not enough time for that. I'm also the author of the Max Craigie series, which are Scottish police procedurals, or I prefer to call them thrillers. I feel like I'm a thriller writer. The latest of which is The Devil You Know, which came out in hardback, ebook and audio in March. It is out in November the 21st in paperback, and that's one about a trafficking story. But I can talk about that later. I'll hand over.
Effie.
Hi, I'm Effie Birch. Lots of people know me as Effie. I like to be known as Effie in the writing world. I have actually outed myself now as Ash Cameron for Confessions of an Undercover Cop. That was published 13 years ago, but we all have different names, don't we? But my latest novel is My Mum, which is a sort of police procedural, but my protagonist is a social worker who works alongside police officers in child protection cases. And it's a lot about justice and family and the ethics of what we think, why we think, that professional collusion, professional compliance bias and all of that sort of thing we explored in there. And that was out in April this year. And I've currently got my third and final collection of short stories as an anthology coming soon called Blood Oranges, My Love.
We've got some hellos already. Just before we go into, I know, George, you want to discuss how you started off as a writer. Kaz wants to know, what's the main thing you all wish people knew about policing? So, George, for you, put you on the spot, sorry.
That's a very difficult one. I very rarely watch any police drama programs because it irritates me so much to see the way.
That's probably helpful because you're going to get the facts right if you're not getting them from TV.
That's right. Yeah. It's a difficult one because the police do so many jobs, and recently the police have been getting very bad publicity. And even though I've been out for several years, I still find that quite upsetting. At the moment, we've got the riots going on, and the police have been getting some very good feedback, etc. But it's such a diverse job. It's difficult to say, what I would like people to know.
That's understandable, Neil.
I mean, just you know what? I'm really forgiving of it because I write police procedurals and I was a cop, so I try and make it as accurate as I can. But to me, it's entertainment. It's got to be fun. It's got to be fast. It's got to be exciting. It's all about the characters, as far as I'm concerned. And they keep taking over, as my editor would say. So there's so much. I'm really forgiving about it, and as long as it's good and I enjoy it, very often the procedural stuff is secondary. I think they should always try and get the simple stuff right, because it can jar you out of a story. I can remember one program I saw, I can't remember what it was, a few years ago, and they went in and they introduced the commissioner and they called him the chief commissioner. And from that moment, I just couldn't take it seriously because that's so daft, and it's so daft to not get it right because you just got to ask someone. It's the same with anything military. I watched the program. It was on Netflix. Everybody watched it with Michelle Keegan. I can't remember the name of it.
Is it the Harlan Coben one?
It was a Harlan Coben one with Michelle Keegan. And one of the characters in there was in the Royal Military Police. Now, I'm ex-military police myself. And his beret was ridiculous. Simply ridiculous. It was, the badge was in the wrong place, and it was, and I couldn't get past it. And I said to my
Fool me once, it was.
So it's really simple. So to me, it's get the simple things right. Things around timelines. Obviously, you're doing a major crime investigation. It takes time. It's also, most major investigations, the bulk of the work is really routine and really, really boring. Now, nobody wants us to show that, and we don't need to show that. You can allude to it. I've got a thing. The example I always give is my guys go off doing all sorts of surveillance and covert surveillance and technical surveillance, all of which in the real world is really onerous to do from a point of view of the bureaucracy that sits behind it. I find a way of shortcutting that. And you can allude to what sits behind it without having to show the reader what it is. Nobody wants to read about a disclosure schedule, but as George will know, your disclosure officer is one of the most important people on the team, and he won't leave his desk. He will be sat there with great big boxes of documents, religiously scheduling each and every one. But if he doesn't do his job right, the whole case, no matter how strong the evidence is, can disappear.
Absolutely.
But who wants to read about that? Nobody wants to read about that. So I find a way. So to me, it's about shortcutting and getting around that. Just get the simple stuff right that's really easy to get right around rank structure and things like that. And also get how cops talk to each other right. Because it's not, it's not a particularly autocratic institution. Another one that dragged me out of the story, it was, some senior officer walked into a police station and all the cops started like stamping to attention like they were guardsmen. Now, the reality is, if when I was even with the commissioners, I met most of the commissioners, I always referred to them as governor. If I'd have stamped to attention in front of John Stevens, he'd have thought I was taking the piss and think, what are you talking about? So just get the simple stuff right. That's just that's my takeaway. Get the simple stuff right. The rest you can hide and don't bother the reader with it because it's dull.
I have to say, I do kind of want to see what happens to the guy at the desk who's got all this weight on it. This is the story I want to read, Neil. That's what I want to see. What is going to happen to make sure this case keeps going when everything in this man's life implodes?
It is. I tell you what, if the disclosure officer doesn't get it right, nothing else will work. The whole lot will go. We won't even get to the trial. That's
interesting to me. You might not need it to sound like a technical Bible, but...
Yeah, but it won't be interesting. You might want to hear half a page about it. Once I get a chapter on disclosure, you'll soon switch off.
I don't know, maybe you can write us a short story.
Oh, God, yeah. It would be very short.
Disclosure.
Very, very, very short.
Effie?
Well, I have a different take again, really. And I think, we're all different. And this is one thing I want people to understand about cops is that everybody is human. We all have stuff behind the doors. We all live ordinary lives. We might be cops when you put a uniform on or you go to work and you're in the office. But it's everybody's human. So every single person, no matter what role you have, you've all got stuff behind the doors. Unless you're a very boring person that don't live, you just live a singular life. And in fiction, Neil's absolutely right. I don't mind a bit of bending of the rules, a bit of, difference, a bit of like excitement, because it's fiction, it's entertainment. I do sometimes switch off if there's something in the book or something in a drama that is absolutely ludicrous. But the biggest critics of crime fiction are people who've worked in criminal justice. But it's not written for criminal justice professionals, it's written for the general public. So, but it does have to be authentic. For me, it's about making it authentic. And I have been a disclosure officer, and I can tell you the pressure on your head is huge. And also, I worked in the Met for a number of years, and then I worked in a Northern Force, and there are differences. So even within cops, you're going to get disagreements, because in the Met, it's very much governor, but up in North, it's boss. And when I first joined, when I was walking the streets of East London in the mid-'80s, I had to salute my inspector if he drove me past and I was on foot patrol. And you'd
all correct, sir.
All correct, sir. They don't do that.
All correct, sir.
Yeah, but you don't do that.
And then the response would be, you'd be thinking, you see a senior officer come in and you go, all correct, sir, and you go, no, it bloody well isn't.
Yeah.
No, but it's changed now. No one would say, nowadays.
Nobody does that anymore.
No one says all correct, sir.
Yeah, but it's different in different forces. It's different in different departments. So I did a lot of years working in child protection, and we dealt with a lot of our own cases that, had it been in the CID office, they'd have had a team on it. But it was just me and one other usually. And I might have 20 victims of a sex offender, and I'd have to do the whole case. I'd have to do the full disclosure. I'd have to do everything, and that's a heck of a lot of responsibility. But in the CID office, you'd have a team of guys, and not very often girls, back in when I was there. But now it's, a lot more equality. But it's just that authenticity, really. I've gone off on a tangent here, but it is authenticity. You can write a tangent as long as it's authentic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really making me wonder what you all found what you find different now to when you first started. There must be a lot of changes that you've seen. And as you've all said, you've all had quite different roles from each other. So what have been the biggest changes for you, George, that you've seen? Good or bad? Hopefully good.
Yeah, that makes me seem old, and I am old. But I started as a cadet in 1966, and then became a PC in 1969. And I was fortunate that on the conclusion of my probation, I was actually went into the CID. So I was a career detective. But if you look back to when I first joined, we didn't have radios. We didn't have telephones. Each time we went out, we would book out, and where we were going, we would have to phone in once every hour, etc. If we wanted to do a check on someone, we'd have to phone back to the station, who would send a telex. What was it called? I think it was called a telex to New Scotland Yard, and you might get the result within a couple of days. The same with vehicles. I can remember as a young PC, if someone around the force or around the country was doing a stop check on the car, and the registration number came as belonging to Brighton, as a young PC on nights, I would come into the station, get the key to the tax office, go into the tax office on my own, and go all through the files to find the name of the owner of the car, and then send it back manually. You know, there's no such thing as CCTV or anything like that. Everything took a long time to do.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I remember being a child, and I think I was 19 when I got my first mobile phone. Yeah. And I can't imagine, I love it now, being able to put it down, but having to do your job without the tech that we have now, I can't even imagine how much longer everything must have taken.
Yeah. I can remember as a young DI, when iPads came out and things, I had one which I got from headquarters, and it caused so much fuss because the others didn't have one. I had to share it. You know, that's the sort of silly things. And then various things started coming out, and things progressed very quickly. But when I first started in the CID, everything was manual. And then Holmes came in, and fortunately, I was in training at the time, and I actually started teaching the Holmes system. But I couldn't get any detectives above the rank of inspector to actually come on the 4-day course. They didn't believe in Holmes. I mean, things have really changed. Everything is now connected.
Do you, Neil?
Yeah, I think the most radical change. I mean, it wasn't in. I mean, I joined in 1990 when mobile phones are really taking off. But in those early days, I was working in a really rough part of North London. If you were walking around where I worked with a mobile phone, you're probably a drug dealer. And it really was that. It was that straightforward. But then, of course, they spread and they became more ubiquitous. But, of course, back then, it was like somebody walking around with like an aerobic step that they were trying to talk into.
Like Dom Jola. Hello.
Exactly. Yeah, it was quite literally like that.
That's huge.
But then it's over the last, I don't know, probably decade. Even longer maybe, but the smartphone is now one of the biggest parts of any investigation. Absolutely crucial. We all live our lives on phones on every level. You can unpick someone's life if you get hold of their mobile phone, what they like to do, where they like to shop, every single place they've been. Because unless you switch your maps off, which most people don't, you literally have a timeline of every single way you go. Now, this offers enormous possibilities for policing because you can quite literally disprove anything that somebody says. You know, sometimes you hear about people having burner phones, but even that becomes really significant because you can then match their burner phone with their clean phone. You have their clean phone, they have their dirty phone, their burner phone. And they think they're being clever by switching their clean phone off when they're doing their badness. But on its own, that's really crucial, because no one switches their phone off ever. None of us do. So if a crime happened between 10 a.m. and 11:30, if your phone suddenly went off at 10 o'clock, 11:30, it's a really good bit of supporting evidence. And there's so much you can tell from them. You know, we've all got health apps on our phone that you can monitor your heart rate, your steps and all this sort of thing. They go further than that. They'll talk about the type of activity you were doing. If you were doing vigorous types of activity at a particular time. So perhaps there's been a murder, and at precisely 8:04, when the victim or someone was phoning in and this was heard, the suspect's phone can be shown to have had a particular type of vigorous activity at the time the person was killed. So to me, the biggest change has been technology, and it's been the advent of us all walking around with a supercomputer in our pockets all the time. It offers massive advantages to criminals, but it also offers massive advantages to people in law enforcement, which is why every book I've ever written has phones very much at the heart, because there's just so much you can do with them. You can have so much fun with them. And to me, it really hits home with readers, because everybody knows that they've got their phone with them all the time, and that people are glued to them, and the maps, and then you can be doing an internet search at this particular point, and it's great fun. So that's I think the most significant change. I mean, obviously, you could talk about DNA, you can talk about all the raft of forensic techniques that we have now. Everybody probably watching this has watched the real CSI, which does paint and give us a real impression about crime scene processing. You look back at the Ripper murders, the Yorkshire Ripper murders back in the day. Look at the historic library footage of that, and you'll see detectives with big handlebar moustaches in their crimpling flare suits, smoking cigarettes, walking around the crime scene over the body. So the changes in the last couple of decades have been enormous, and yet the changes prior to me joining were far less. And obviously, George, you'd agree it was even more, because you were in the police a long time before me. So yeah, there's been so many changes, but the big one for me is mobile phones.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on, George. And then, so we all started talking all at once then. So George, you had a reply to Neil?
No, I was just saying I agree.
Okay, thank you. Effie?
Well, they haven't left me much to talk about, have they? But what I would say is, for me, I think absolutely technology and forensics, but I think diversity, because I'm part of lots of different Facebook groups for police or ex-police officers and all the rest of it. And the diversity now, I joined at 19 in 1985, and I was green, but I had a skirt, I had stockings or tights and flat shoes, I had a tiny truncheon, I had a handbag. You look at what policewomen are wearing today, and it's fit for purpose. It wasn't fit for purpose then. But I remember doing the Wapping riots in a skirt. The only policewomen that were allowed to wear trousers were those on horseback. And I think the diversity now, we police society which is so diverse. So why should your police not come from that very diverse society? There's a lot of older cops, much longer retired, that might criticise, oh, look at the state of them, look at the long hair, look at the tattoos. When I joined, you couldn't have tattoos showing. I remember at training school, I'd got my hair cut quite short at the time, thinking that would be adequate. Female chief inspector came round, all the female officers, get your hair cut, it needs to be above your collar or tied back. If you can't tie it back, it needs to be shorter. I had to go and get my hair cut, whereas now, those rules, yes, I do believe in being smart, I do, absolutely. But when you're practically dealing, and I've been with my police hat off and my hair all over the place, and you're running along the street, it has to be practical and fit for purpose. And I think we've seen that in that, the diversity of the people coming in, the people that want to be cops, the people that now can be cops that would have been restricted because of the height or various other different attributes, And as long as you can do the job, and that you have a degree of fitness, and that you've got the equipment to do it, I think that's good. And we need to acknowledge that within society, because one size doesn't fit all, does it?
We've got a comment from Kaz. She says, what's the most funny crime story you have? Oh. She went to school with someone who stole the security camera when it was on. I would be a dreadful thief. I can't lie to save my life, and I'm all fingers and thumbs at the best of times. So that'd be the kind of thing that would happen if I tried to be bad in any way. I would literally be the one stealing the camera that was switched on. I'm not very bright.
Yeah, there were so many. If I may give one,
Mhm.
it's not too rude. I was a young DC in Brighton, and one of the things you get, places like Brighton, you get very familiar in a professional way with prostitutes and things like that, and you understand why they're doing what they're doing. It was Christmas Eve. I was a young DC. I'd arrested a well-known prostitute for handing stolen goods, jewellery. Okay. Late Christmas Eve, up in the CID office typing away, the matron telephoned me to say, X has asked to see you. I thought she's going to confess. So I rushed down to the cell block, which was in the basement. I grabbed the keys from matron. I walked along to the cell. I opened the cell door. Almost with head down, I walked in, and her name wasn't Carol, but I'm going to say Carol. And I opened it and said, Carol, what do you want? And I looked up, and this 22, 23-year-old prostitute was standing there, totally naked, up like that. And she said to me, Merry Christmas, Mr. Smith. I was quite embarrassed. I rushed out, and then I'm standing by matron with the charge sheet and summary, etc. All visits have to be put down. How do I put this down? You know, walked in the cell block, prisoner was standing naked and made me an offer. That is just one.
That you could refuse.
I could refuse.
Neil, top that one.
I you know what? There's so many things that happen, and I mean, you know, you do come across some really funny things and some things that and it can come out of nowhere. Just top of my head, we were doing and things come out of this really serious stuff, and it can be really serious things, and there's these really funny little stories that happen. We had one job. I was on a proactive team in North London, and we were doing a job on a gang of organised Tamil criminals, Sri Lankans. We'd not really heard much of them because they'd been very much under the radar. But then there were a couple of really brutal murders, only within their own community. We need to get on top of it. So we started doing a load of work and got a load of intelligence work, and we were going into all the usual things, into the sources and the informants and all this. And then one bloke came in and he goes, it's the East London Tamils. I think they've got a grenade. Heard the whisper that they've got grenades and they're planning it to attack the West crew. Jesus, that's big. That's really big. So we start urgent inquiry required. We need to do a forced warrant the next day. So we get everything going together, get the firearms teams booked, expo on, you know, the EOD, explosive people on standby, and book it all for the next morning. So 4:00 the next morning, big job, hundreds of cops everywhere. Doors go in, arm team go in, dig out, take everybody out in handcuffs, and then you do the search. So we got in, we had one of the firearms detection dogs and the explosive detection dogs in, and the handler was this massive great guy called Rowley. Don't know why I mentioned that. I just mentioned it because he's a right character, enormous great bloke. And his dog, can't remember his real name, but he used to call him Rudy because he looked like Rude Hullet. You remember the bloke with his hair was like this, and this dog was huge, a massive great Springer Spaniel, and he was like the problem child dog of the dog handling world. He used to like smash houses up just because he was so clumsy. So anyway, he's running around this house crazy, looking for this, and then he stops. You know, bearing in mind this is really serious. It's a grenade, you know, these hand grenades. He stops like that and starts looking at the cupboard above a bed, his tail going like that. And Rowley goes, Christ, that's a hell of an indication that we need to get the boys, the explosives boys to come up. Need to get them coming up quick. This could be it. So look at the dog, and the dog is literally like this. You know the way that a spaniel gets fixated, you know, like that. And he goes, I'm just going to have a look. And he goes up gingerly, and he just opens up the cupboard a little bit, and he goes, oh, you bastard. He looks at the dog, and he goes, what? He goes, it's hobnobs. He bloody loves hobnobs. Yeah, so it's little, honestly, these are the things I think, I need to write that into a book.
Yeah.
Because, and that's why I'll get these ideas and from characters, because the best thing about policing, I think, is, and what my time in policing gave me was the characters I met, because some of them there were some right eccentrics and really funny guys. And Ross Fraser, the sweary DI in the Max Craigie books, is totally based on a guy. The only real difference in him is that this bloke was from Bristol and had a real proper Bristolian accent like this. And but you get these stories, and so I can tell that story. And when I do sometimes tell it at festivals and things like that. But it allows me to show off and think, and to talk about the people, and to talk about this mental dog that used to smash people's houses up when it went running around searching. So there's just so much that you can take from a policing career. And as much as all of it, it's the characters and the character, the villains you meet, and just the people you meet in passing, and so you can't beat it for giving you a story of characters. But then I guess you talk to nurses and doctors and people in the fire brigade, they'll say the same. It's just that you get, because some right old characters, you get attracted into the job, but then you'll meet them because you're meeting everybody from society. So I think that's the biggest thing it's given me in terms of being a writer, is the characters and the stories and experiences and anecdotes that I can then turn to my advantage to lighten the books up, because otherwise they could get a bit dark.
Effa?
Well, I'll draw you back to my Confessions of an Undercover Cop, because it's full of funny police stories. The night I spent with James Bond, the night I went undercover at a wife swapping party. There's just so many stories. Where do you start? But like Neil,
with the wife swapping party.
Well, you'll have to buy the book to find out and read it. You pick up a dead body that's been frozen to the ground, one of my first dead bodies, and the police humour is, you pick it up and the body part falls off. And that's not funny. But in the police world, it's that black humour that you go in that, you have to find something in that. So I went to a house visit with the social worker, and the family, really dysfunctional family, but really chaotic. And there was stuff everywhere. There was guinea pigs running around the house. There was all sorts. Most people have dogs and cats. These had guinea pigs. But there was, the whole house was a menagerie, and the parrot kept talking to you, and you couldn't say anything without it repeating to you. And the man sat there with big horny toenails. And they had this great big Aga where they cooked the food. And we're there because one of the children had been a victim of some, paedophile. Well, it was a paedophile. And we had to then talk to make arrangements so we could speak to the child in the video suite. And we'd gone there to do that, myself and a social worker. And then we could smell something, and the social worker says, "Oh, you're cooking the tea." And the woman looks, and she looks at her husband. "Oh my God." And this is terrible. I'll be struck off for telling you this. I probably should have chosen a different story.
Do I need to stop you there?
She put the tortoise in the Aga to warm through. And she'd forgotten. And the tortoise ended up being cooked. Now, it's not funny. That is not funny, but it was. It's one of those things that, oh my word. But it's things like that you take with you, that you then put in your books, that give it. Well, I probably won't put that bit in a book.
I've only written 3 books, but I have to say all my characters, almost without exception, are based on real people that I've come across. Some are people you wouldn't think I would respect. I mentioned the prostitute. Another prostitute, I have a great regard for her because you get to know them in detail. This particular one had been through an abusive marriage. She was at a low ebb. She had 2 kids. She went into prostitution. She financed both of those children through private education. She purchased a small boarding house and run that as a business. And in addition, she was handing stolen goods, yes. But you have to look at these characters and think where they've come from, why they're doing it. I say all my 3 books, the characters are all real. And I'm just thinking, as was said, quite often we're dealing with serious matters, but there's a funny side. As DCI at Brighton, I was probably going to a post-mortem every 2 weeks. never very pleasant spending 3 or 4 hours actually being involved in a post-mortem, but the characters involved there, and I've put that in one of the books. There's one of the assistants there. She used to always make the coffee for us, and it was digestive biscuits. If we had a particularly difficult murder and a home office pathologist was involved, there was one who used to come down. He was one of the key men. She would always give him chocolate biscuits, whereas the rest of us would just get plain digestive and things like that. But if you had seen her handling the organs, etc., taking them from the pathologist, weighing them, etc., and then 10 minutes later making the tea and the coffee and handing out the biscuits. Again, I've mentioned that in one of my books. It's the funny things, and as was said, it's the funny things that keep you going. Or
there must be something in mortuaries, in post-mortems and pathologists. I totally do that as well, because I've got a recurring character who keeps appearing in the books. He's the mortuary tech. I can't remember. They've got an official name, haven't they?
Yeah.
But they're the people who slice and dice to let the obviously the pathologist do the work.
Yeah.
And there's one that I've called him in the books. I call him Baz, and he's totally based on the guy that used to be at Northwood Park Hospital in London, and he had a big beard, and he had like jet black hair. He had sleeve tattoos on both arms, and he used to play thrash metal whilst he was preparing the body.
Yeah.
And he was hilarious because he never called you by your name. He'd always call you some sort of like, all right, fam, all right, geezer, all right, mate, all right, shag, and all this sort of stuff. And I just think they're the little funny quirks that really bring things to life, and makes it more.
When I'm thinking about, he always wore green Wellington boots. Nothing seemed to fit. He had the clothing he wore, long clothing. As you say, he never actually called you by name. Very rarely looked at you. It was the head down. He would, time to bring up the body, and there we would go. But post-mortems, there are strange things. I always felt different for a few hours after I've been to a post-mortem, because nothing in life can be serious to cause you to get upset. My wife always used to say she could tell when I've been to a post-mortem, because I'd come home, I was quiet, and she could tell me the washing machine's broken and she's crashed the car. And I'd just say, okay, darling, that's all right. Made you appreciate life.
Because when I first joined, I was there was 6 of us went to our police station, and you had to do 10 weeks on the streets when you first went on your street duties course. It's different now. And they thought it was funny to give me all the post-mortems, being a woman. And they ended up calling me Sudden Death Sharon, Sharon being my first name, not Effie, And by the time we went to our official post-mortem, for our training purposes, I'd done half a dozen at least by then. And one guy threw up, another one fainted, because, by that time I was a dab hand, wasn't I? But it's so respectful to do a post-mortem, and working in child protection, obviously I had to do children and babies, and it's those things that stick with you. And you're absolutely right. When I've done it, been to a child or a baby, I had 3 children of my own, and I would come home to, and I would tuck them into bed, and I would read them a story, and then I'd go for a walk. I'm fortunate to live opposite the sea, and those nights, those days, I would just go, because it gives you something. It's both a privilege and it's hard to have to put those emotions, but you can draw on that in fiction without actually describing in detail, And then that's the sad side to the job. But you're there for a reason, to get justice, to find out what happened, and it is a privilege.
It's actually a privilege to deal with someone's death, murder. Yeah. May I just mention, you mentioned children. Yes, I've been to a lot of post-mortems, but some stay in your mind.
Yeah.
And one that really always stays in my mind, and I still feel very sad about it, is a little 4-year-old who's been beaten by its mother and died. I'd actually seen this little girl when she was alive, but in hospital. And then I had to go to the post-mortem. Very sad. But I can remember her being brought in onto the slab, still with a blanket around her. The pathologist taken the blanket off, etc. And there were half a dozen small furry toys with her. And the pathologist put them up on to the shelf. Didn't mention it, just put them up on the shelf and then continued. About half an hour later, when the gruesome bit of the post-mortem was going on, the female assistant, who was the same one who used to do the chocolate biscuits, just gave me a little nudge and said, look at there. And it's silly, but it looked as though these little furry animals were actually watching, looking over, protecting this 4-year-old. I can still see that all these years later.
It must be. Sorry, Effie, say again.
No, just that we've taken a somber turn, haven't we?
Yeah.
We tend to do a bit of sombre, a bit of light-hearted, a bit of ridiculous with dogs with biscuits and Christmas Eve surprises. You know, we do. We tend to go all over the place, and we love a good tangent because you end up talking about things that you've maybe not even discussed before. Donna asked, "Has technology made criminals clever or more stupid?" I have a feeling that it's going to be, that was what I was going to say, Neil. I reckon
both,
it's probably going to be both.
They think they're impregnable. They think, I mean, like there's a whole raft of criminals now going to jail because they believed EncroChat was unbreakable. EncroChat was encrypted phones that were, criminals would buy these phones really expensive, and they believed that their communications were totally secure, but they weren't. Because I think it was the French, or was it the Dutch? I can't remember. Broke EncroChat, and there's still loads of washing up going on about people trying to say it's invasion of privacy and were the messages in action. Therefore, was it an intercept? Therefore, can they be used as evidence and things like that? But the simple fact is, you had a load of criminals totally relying on this technology, and it caught them out. And a load of very serious villains ended up in jail for a long period of time for being, international drug dealers. So, technology. It has, I would say, overall, it's a cost benefit to police. I mean, we've just seen what that irresponsible use of technology can do. Because if it wasn't for social media, we wouldn't have had the riots we've just had. And that all comes down to bad faith state actors stirring this up deliberately and getting in among the stupid to try and tell them that all their problems are caused. Even though nothing... the reasons these riots started were because of one Instagram feed or Facebook feed or whatever it was. I think it's called 3chan or something like that. Propagated a story that the guy who killed those poor girls in Southport was an immigrant who came over on a boat last year. Of course, we now know that's all nonsense. But the irresponsible use of technology allowed that to spread and allowed these riots to happen. And now we're seeing stupid people going to jail for 2, 3, 4 years at a time. So the use of technology by criminals can work obviously well for them. If you're the bad state actor sat at the top of the tree, not caring what happens to these people, you just want to further your aim of sowing division within the UK. But it also allows the police to go around and sweep it all up because all these people are going to go to jail. We saw this in 2011. A lot of people went to jail for doing very stupid things. And they never thought it would happen to them because they're too dumb to realise they're being recorded all the time. So, and it's incredibly helpful for policing with all the technology. It can give you so much. You can be tracking where people are going. You can be putting lumps on their car. You can be putting bugs in their cars, in their houses. Overall, I think it's an advantage to the police, but there are downsides as well. And social media is a disease, is the long and the short of it. And yet here we all are.
It's a very difficult thing, isn't it, Effie?
I think the smartest criminals are the ones that keep themselves off the radar. They don't do social media. They always deal in cash. They give themselves a very low profile on anything online. And they're the smart ones, and they know how to play the system and how to hide in plain sight.
George?
Yeah, I don't think I've got much more to add. It's I'm just sitting here thinking I enjoyed my career. In some respects, I wish I could do it over again from today forward because, as you say, there is so much technology. I mean, I got involved in a lot of technology when I was working in the security service, but how things have changed and come on in the last 10, 15 years. I look at it with, oh, I wish I could be involved in that.
Absolute nightmare for the guys on the street, though. I really feel for them. I've got a lot of family members who are uniformed police officers now in the southeast, mostly in London, and they can't do anything. Literally, the second a simple interaction with somebody on the street, you know you've got people in your face with a camera, literally in your face, coming up to you like this when you're just trying to do your job. And they never show what started these situations. And when you see, because you have a bit of rough and tumble with someone on the street, because you saying, I want to search you, I'm going to arrest you. And it becomes, they start to resist. It never looks pretty. It never, ever looks pretty. It's not like you used to see on the bill where Polly Page would put 6'8", massive, great bodybuilder in an arm lock and he'd go, ow. Doesn't work that way. When you have a big roll around with someone who does not want to be arrested, it can take five people and it still looks awful. And yet we just saw this from Manchester Airport. They clip it and they clip these things and they put them on to show the police in the worst light. Now, we all saw what happened. Guy gets a kick in the head. Guy gets stamped on his head. It looks awful. And we shouldn't really talk about it because it's still not been resolved. But we also then saw what the preamble to this and what started. And that adds a little bit of context and nuance that is sadly missing. So the big downside with technology, mobile phones, things like that, is how irresponsibly it does get used and then shared and propagated by people who should know better, including like mainstream news media, who will share it widely before anybody knows about what preceded it. So yeah, it's, I agree with you, George. I mean, I loved my time in the job. I enjoyed what I did, but it's hard for the people on the streets now because mobile phones have made it a nightmare, an absolute nightmare.
My son's just about to join, and I keep instilling into him, it's not like the stories he hears from me and his dad, because his dad was a cop as well. And it's like, it's a totally different world out there now. And I'm glad I don't have to do it. I loved it. I loved all of it. And I would do it again in a heartbeat, but probably not today.
I prefer writing about it. I love writing about it. Yeah, this is the most fun I've ever had. Right, sitting around in the Highlands writing made up nonsense.
I know when I joined, talking to the old guys who were about to retire, saying to me, "Oh, I'm glad I've finished. I would like to do the job now."
Yeah,
it has changed. I'm a great fan of saying, "I did my time. I was honest. I was industrious, but I've done my time. I've handed the baton on or the truncheon on to someone else. And one thing I never do is criticise what's going on now, etc. Give them as much support as you can." I mean, I was talking this morning to my wife about the Olympics. I don't like it, but it's changed. It's changed all these silly new sports. But I'm talking as a 74, 75-year-old, not as a 20-year-old. And I often say again, I can remember when I was a teenager and the Beatles and the Stones, and I had a pair of Cuban heel boots, beautiful boots. My father coming in, and he was only 20 odd years older than me, and going absolutely spare of what I was wearing, and the fact my hair was probably 2 inches longer than his. And I think there's only that 20 odd year difference. When I look at football now, and when I look at the Olympics, there's 50, 55 years difference. So I'd like to sit back and say, I've had my time. It's down to them. I support them.
100%.
We're coming up to, we've got kind of 8 minutes left. What I'd like to ask you all is, what is coming up next for you in terms of book releases, events you might be doing, anything at all that you want to share? Let's end on a high. So, George, let's go back to you first.
We'll say my latest book, Climate of Fear, came out a few months ago. I haven't any plans at the moment to write another book. I might change that in a few months' time. To say it's a hobby with me. I don't make any money from it. You've probably seen. I actually contribute all my royalties to a well-known charity nearby. I also undertake presentations to them. One of the presentations is entitled "My Life of Crime," again, the fee and all donations, etc., go to the charity. So that's my personal thing. Saying, not getting too serious, but why am I doing that? I had a beautiful daughter. She died 2 years ago from cancer. She was 41. She got tremendous assistance, palliative care from the charity. That is why I'm doing it for them. Say, I'm coming up to 75. I look upon myself very briefly, compare myself in some respects with another author, Peter James. We share things in common. We're the same age. We both come from Brighton. He's sold about, I think it's 20 million books. I've sold a few less, as far as I'm concerned. And I know Peter because when he started his writing of the series, he actually spent a couple of days in Brighton looking at police procedures, etc. And the other person you probably heard of is Graham Bartlett, an old friend of mine. Graham, with Peter, wrote the book Death Comes Knocking. There's a whole chapter in there that deals with a triple murder I dealt with. It's quite embarrassing because he actually compares me with the young Grace, etc. I'm not sure, it's difficult. I've got so much to do and I've got so little time to do it. We'll have to see, but I don't currently have any plans to actually write another book. But,
well, I hope if that changes that you will come back and have a one-to-one interview with us talking about that.
Well, I can certainly have a one-to-one interview of my background and why I got involved. But we'll see.
Neil?
The paperback of The Devil You Know is out in November. Was going to be March, but Tesco decided they wanted to do a thing with it, and so they pushed it back to the 21st of February. Max Craigie 6, which is called When Shadows Fall, is coming out in March next year. Really excited about that. And there's something secret happening that I can't really tell you about, but there will be something else happening, another series of books coming, written by me, but probably under a pseudonym. And that's hopefully there'll be some news about that. And I'm hopeful there'll be a book in about May next year, a new totally new thing. But you'll have to wait to find out a bit more about that.
Oh, you know how patient we are, Neil. Come on.
Yeah, I'm busy. I'm busy. I've got a lot to do. I've got an awful lot to do over the next. So yeah, I mean, I went from being retired to now being busier than I've ever been. But that's fine. I've got nothing. What else am I going to do? Sit and look at the view all day. So no, it's great. I love being busy. So
it's one of those things, isn't it? How did you ever find time to do anything when you had a job as well? Full-time job?
I don't know. I don't know how I'm good mates with Tony Kent. I don't know how he manages to do what he does whilst being a full-time barrister. So all is good. It's good fun.
He's got some super secret squirrel stuff going on as well. So intrigued to find out what you're all up to at the end of this year. Effie.
Right, well, I've got my third anthology of short stories that have been previously published or competition winners or some, been out there before, coming in September. I'll be going to Bloody Scotland, but not as a panelist, just as an attendee. I've got Cat Dubois #2, the sequel to She's Not There, coming in January, I think, which is Last Train Through Pitlochry. And then I am currently writing a new series, Sally Watson Investigates, and I'm so excited about it. It keeps detracting me away from the one I should be writing and finishing. I'm just so excited about that. I'm looking for an agent. I'm looking for a publishing deal. And I've just been co-opted onto the CWA board as the safeguarding officer. So that's keeping me busy alongside my full-time job and my grandchildren and everything else I've got to do. I just wish I could write full-time. That's the dream. So if anybody can make that dream come true.
I should have mentioned I'm going to be at Bloody Scotland this year. I'm doing a panel. I'm doing a panel on the Sunday morning with Quentin Jardine. I'm at not that there's many people from the Republic of Ireland, but I'm at Spike Island Literary Festival, which is an old prison island off the coast of County Cork. I'm there next month on the 23rd of this month, 23rd of August. I've just spoken to Michelle about that. What else am I doing? I'm at Chiltern Kills. I'll be at Chiltern Kills in October, which is the thing that Tony Kent organises. I'm doing something there. I can't remember what, to be honest.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, Effie.
No, I interrupted Neil. I didn't.
No, it's all right. I think that's it, unless I've forgotten anything, which I might have done.
I'm online again at 2:30 with David Mark talking about memoir writing. So I've got 2 events in one day. So if anybody wants to jump on that, the thing's on my Facebook page. But I'll see you at Chiltern Kills as well. I'm not there as a panellist, again, as an attendee. There's so many festivals. And honestly, you could just spend your whole life doing them, couldn't you? But,
yeah, that could be a full-time job in itself, couldn't it? Travelling the festivals. Thank you all so much. So thank you to everyone who's watched and asked questions, and some familiar faces, familiar names in the from the members watching, which is always lovely. Our next panel is, let me think, is in an hour. It's at 3 o'clock, and it's Kaz, and I believe Kaz has law, but I could be wrong. I feel like I'm probably wrong. Come back at 3 and find out what on earth Kaz is up to and who she's talking to. And then we've got Karen on at 5 o'clock with the next panel, and the final one, the headline's on at 7 p.m. tonight. So we've got quite a full day, and I'm hoping Manchester cools down a little bit. Hope you all get a bit more sunshine, because you all seem to be able to cope with it better than me. Thank you all so much, and I hope you come back and talk about books again with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.